My son took brutal revenge on my ex, 20 years after he abandoned us. It's been over 20 years, but the pain still lingers. I was young, in love, and pregnant with what I thought was our child, our future. My boyfriend at the time was everything to me, and when I found out I was pregnant, I thought it would solidify our relationship, make us a family. But I was wrong. He didn't stick around. He kicked me out when I was 5 months pregnant. I was devastated. He said he wasn't ready to be a father and didn't want the responsibility. Just like that, he washed his hands of me and our unborn child. I was left to fend for myself, broken-hearted and scared. But through all of it, my son became the light in my life. Raising him alone wasn't easy, but every smile, every step, and every achievement made the hardships worth it. As my son grew older, he asked about his father. I was always honest with him, not cruel, but truthful. I didn't want him to think I was hiding anything. And while I never spoke about his father with venom, I could tell my son held a deep grudge. He never outwardly expressed it, but I could feel the resentment simmering beneath the surface. Which one is cuter? Like for the dog and comment for the cat. Fast forward to today. My son is 20 years old now, and we have an incredibly close bond. He's smart, kind-hearted, and determined. A few weeks ago, something happened that I never expected. My ex, the same man who threw me out, ended up in the news. He'd fallen on hard times, lost his job, and was desperate for help. He'd turned to crowdfunding, posting about his financial woes and asking for support. To my surprise, the post started going viral, gaining a lot of sympathy. And this is where things took a darker turn. My son, without telling me, hatched a plan. He reached out to his father under a fake identity, offering a job at a company that didn't exist. The offer was generous, too good to refuse. Desperate, my ex accepted the invitation for an interview. Into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. When my ex arrived, he found my son standing there waiting for him. My ex didn't recognize him at first, but when my son introduced himself as the child he'd abandoned, the color drained from my ex's face. At that moment, everything shifted. My son wasn't there just to confront him. He was there to destroy him. He pulled out a folder of documents he had carefully gathered over months. Through some legal connections and technical skills, my son had dug into every skeleton my ex had in his closet. Bank records, debts, unpaid child support, and shady business dealings. He knew everything. "I'm not here for an apology," my son said coldly. "I'm here to ruin what's left of you." And ruin him, he did. Using the documents, my son blackmailed my ex. He threatened to expose him to his few remaining connections, the authorities, and the public. He forced him to sign over what little assets he had left to us, including his house, his car, and his meager savings. My ex was left with nothing. Then, my son did the unthinkable. He handed over the evidence to the authorities anyway. Fraud, tax evasion, and a mountain of unpaid fines, all piled onto the man who had once abandoned us. With no resources and no way out, my ex was arrested within days, and from what we hear, he's now facing years in prison. But that wasn't enough for my son. Before he was hauled off to jail, my son paid him one last visit, this time with a camera. He filmed my ex in his cell, broken and humiliated, and uploaded the footage online with the full story of his abandonment, betrayal, and downfall. It spread like wildfire. Overnight, my ex became a viral symbol of failure and regret, a laughingstock. As the world mocked him, my son and I sat together, watching it all unfold. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of closure. My son had avenged us in a way I never thought possible. And my ex? He'll never be able to rebuild what we tore down. In the end, the world knew the truth. He abandoned his family, and karma came knocking in the form of his own son. A few years passed, and life had settled into something peaceful. My son was flourishing, working hard, building a life of his own, and I had found my own rhythm. The days of betrayal felt far behind us. Until, one afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived. There he was, my ex, standing at our doorstep with a smug grin on his face, leaning against a sleek luxury car. He looked polished, confident, like he had somehow turned his life around. "I've made it," he boasted, flashing wads of cash like he was untouchable. "I'm here to take you both to my new house. It's time we start over, as a family." His audacity was breathtaking. After all the damage he had caused, he thought he could erase 2 decades of abandonment with money and a new car? I stood there, stunned, as he spewed tales of newfound success, bragging about his big break and his plans to live a life of luxury. My son, however, wasn't moved. He'd already anticipated something like this. Silently, he nodded to me, and I knew what was coming next. "You're not here to make amends," my son said calmly, stepping out of the house. "You're here to feed your ego, to show off what you think you've earned. But nothing's changed. You're still the same man who walked away when we needed you." My ex tried to laugh it off, but there was a nervous edge in his voice. "You've got it all wrong. This is a second chance." But my son had prepared for this day. He wasn't about to let his father waltz back into our lives and pretend the past hadn't happened. He had spent years quietly tracking my ex's every move, and this flashy comeback? It was just another illusion. Unbeknownst to my ex, my son had already dug deep into his new success. The business deals? Shady, the car, rented, the money, borrowed from dangerous people who would come calling soon. My son had even gone a step further, gathering irrefutable evidence that this latest scheme was more illegal than the last. My ex tried to interrupt, but my son cut him off. "You walked out on us once, and now you're going to wish you'd stayed away." Then, my son dropped the final blow. He had already sent the evidence, everything about my ex's fraudulent business deals, tax evasion, and outstanding debts, straight to the authorities. And just like before, he wouldn't just expose him, he would obliterate him. Within days, the house of cards my ex had built crumbled once again. His accounts were frozen, his new ventures seized, and this time, there was no escape. He had no connections left, no money to flee, and the very people he owed would come looking for him soon enough. As he was dragged away in cuffs for the second time, my son didn't need to visit him or film anything this time. There was no need. My ex had lost everything, again. Only this time, there was no dramatic confrontation, no last words. The world already knew who he was, and this fall was even steeper than the first. We watched from a distance as his story fizzled into nothing, as he became just another man who couldn't outrun his past. No viral mockery, no grand spectacle, just quiet, irreversible defeat. And as my son and I stood together, looking at the empty space where the car once was, I realized that this time, the revenge was final. He'd come back to take us with him, and instead, we'd watched him disappear from our lives for good. There would be no more comebacks.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like this video, hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned for more. Things are about to get intense.